Hey everybody, this is International Master David Pruess for Chess.com, and today we're covering a really fundamental strategy for chess, which is how to attack on an open e-file when you have been so fortunate or clever as to castle while your opponent has not. And the e-file becomes open. The e-file, of course, is the file of residence for both kings. So how to attack when that file is open and you've castled and your opponent hasn't. Obviously, it's a very favorable situation for you, but it's still good to know how to knock him out, right? So this being as fundamental as it is, I'm doing 3 different videos with examples on it. One classic video, a Morphy massacre, and a second classic video, which is going to be more advanced than this video, which is covering a Steinitz game. But this one here, we're going to see a pretty simple game in order to illustrate the principles very simply and clearly. So first of all, let's go quickly through this opening. A 2 knights defense. Black plays aggressively, leaving c6 undefended, counterattacking f2. And in this position, you could still play bishop d7 to defend c6, but black castles, offering a sacrifice of material, which white accepts with knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, knight takes, and then grabbing on c6 after all these trades, and further attacking the rook and the pawn. So the first step in attacking on an open e-file is, of course, to keep your opponent's king from castling. And thus far, we've seen in my video about how to prevent your opponent from castling. So the bishop comes to this nice weak diagonal, and white's going to have to figure out something to do about their king. But before he tends to his king, he decided to tend to the hanging rook, so white captures the rook. Now, black needs to develop an attack here, okay? So moves like queen takes a8 aren't quite going to cut it, okay? White's going to play queen d2 and knight to c3 and castle queenside. When you play rook e8, he'll play f4, and you can play f6 trying to open up this file, but you're just not in time, right? Knight c3, and you take, and white will castle to safety. Or he could play queen takes d5 check and trade queens. So black here needs to play a pretty threatening move, and actually he has a fantastic one to start building his attack and initiative. Not a super obvious move, actually, but black can bring his queen to a square from which it makes 2 threats. 2 threats are better than 1, and black is now threatening to take on g2, which is big because it would actually trap white's rook potentially, right, and prevent white from ever castling kingside, and to play queen takes e5 check, which would create the open e-file for attacking purposes. Now here, white has more than one possible defense, so let us just look at 1 or 2 possible moves for white. First, queen to d5. Now, black has more than one good move he can play here. One nice move is just to come to the open file with the point that if white takes, black can play checkmate. But I believe this move actually fails to this tricky move from white, blocking the queen's attack. And if black takes the queen, white will take the queen and remain ahead of rook. And if black takes the pawn instead, white will take the rook and checkmate the black king on the back rank. So rook d8 looks very nice, but I think what black needs to do here is play queen check, almost checkmating the white king. The queen's forced back, and now queen takes b2, attacking the rook and the pawn on e5. If black captures the rook, then material's already equal, so the most obvious move we need to consider for white is knight d2. But that move fails to a simple checkmate on the e-file, right? So there you have it. First way to win with an attack on the open e-file, a simple crisscrossed checkmate. So that deals with queen takes pawn on d5. So white's other good defenses are knight c3 and queen d2. So knight c3 is played in the game, so we'll look at queen d2 first. And black will take this pawn with check. And the white king could boogie, or white could block with his queen. If the white king just sort of heads over this way, there's more than one nice thing that black could do, but actually basically the simplest thing for black to do would be to just capture this bishop Because now you've got a situation where you're not down very much material. You've got a bishop against a rook, and the white king is stuck in the center for good. And furthermore, you've got threats like queen takes b2 and knight e4. So that is like the simplest approach, and it will certainly lead to a winning position for black. So queen e5 check, queen e3. Black's now going to play queen takes b2. And white can't capture black's knight because of queen c1 checkmate. So in this position, white can really give up with a safe conscience. About that, there was no defense available. So the game continues with the move knight to c3. And now black's going to open the e-file. That's always step 2. Queen takes e5 check. Now, very important, the white king can't run away because black has the move queen f4 check, forcing him back onto the open e-file. And now rook e8, finishing him off because the only piece that can block is the knight, and the bishop is also on that square. So that wins for black. He could take with his rook, he could take with his bishop, he could attack the knight in extra time with his queen, he could do whatever there. Okay, so king d2 is not really a defense, so white plays his knight to e2 to block the file. So now we have the typical scenario where you have an open attack on the e-file. And the key is very, very often going to be how many times you can attack the piece that's going to block the file. So black has nicely coordinated already with the bishop and the queen on e2. The key thing you want to calculate is, do you have enough pieces attacking e2 so that if your opponent castled, you could win the piece on e2? In this position, the answer is already yes. Black has 2 attackers and white has 2 defenders, and one of them is the king. So if white castles, the knight will be undefended. So the best thing to do here for black is you simply capture that bishop on a8, and if white castles, you'll capture on e2, and you'll have 2 pieces against a rook in the endgame, which is enough to win if you know how to play the endgame. Good luck with that. So black captures this piece, and white is now going to struggle around trying to get an extra defender onto e2 so that he can then evacuate his king. One thing you'll sometimes see people do is play like f3, king f2, and bring their rook over. The thing that white does in the game is he plays f4 to try and gain 1 extra tempo on the queen compared to that. But let's look at f3 for a moment. So if white plays f3, what should black do? The first thing you want to look at is, can you just attack this piece enough times to capture and win it? The second thing you would look for is, can you prevent king f2? So if you thought of queen e3, that's in the right direction of things you should be looking at, but actually you're looking in the wrong order. First, you want to look at rook e8 and see if white has any defense for his knight on e2. And the answer is, he doesn't. Okay, and this is the simplest way to win. You just pile up on that piece, and when you get to, 3 attackers to 2 defenders, you take it. So in the game, white plays f4. And the black queen moves to e4. Now, if white moves his king to f2 to try and bring his rook over, what should black do about this? The answer is you have to do a little calculation. The first thing to look at was, of course, rook to e8, and then you saw white can defend with rook to e1. You will look if you have any kind of follow-up there. You can also look for moves that would prevent this by trying to check the white king. So for example, this move here is a totally good move to think of, followed by taking this pawn with check, right? And you're hoping to force the white king back onto the first rank to keep his rook from coming out. And then, he would block with his queen, and you would play knight e4 check, and you will actually force the white king back to the first rank and get probably a winning position for black. Because if white is unable to get his rooks around his king, this knight is going to continue to be better than either of his rooks, and black will have a winning attack. But the simplest approach here for black is actually to calculate the rook e8 move an extra step. After rook to e1, you can check the white king, keeping it from running into the corner. The white king is forced back to f1, and then you follow in with knight to e4, which is even stronger than taking this pawn with check, right? You don't want to make his king move away. You move your knight in, threatening checkmate, and white cannot defend himself. The only move that you might be thinking looks like a defense is queen here, but black would capture it, and the knight can't recapture because of this diagonal. So after f4, queen e4, white did not try moving his king because of that checkmating attack. Instead, he brings the rook over to defend the knight from f2. Now, what move should you look at first for black? Before you look at trying to prevent white's idea, you look at, can I just build up and win by attacking this? So that is actually how you can win. So black plays rook to e8, allows white to bring his rook to a good defensive square. And now black is just going to bring in an extra attacking unit. Okay? This is really, really the key. If your opponent has any ability to defend, they will have, 2 or 3 pieces that will defend e2. You will bring the first wave of your forces to aim at it, and then you'll reach a little bit of a stalemate. Now, it's a long, long road for this rook to get into the game. That gives you some time, but what you need to figure out is a way to get extra attackers, okay? Sometimes you can find extra angles of attack, like if on this move here, you had tried taking on g2 and sort of opening up more of this area of the board to find extra angles to attack the white king. That's definitely one valid approach. But the most common approach is that you just find a way to beat up on this even more. And so one option is to move the knight to e6 and then to d4 or f4. That's very logical, right? To try and bring this knight to attack white's knight. It turns out there's an even easier way, which couples with a second technique, which you always want to do, which is to open more lines, right? So black plays d4 here. The idea is that black will play d3, bringing a new attacker on the knight. So let me make a passing move for white. Black will play d3, new attacker on the knight. White takes it. Black brings in a new attacker with the knight. Now, this knight isn't attacking e2, but after, say, white's king moves, you're removing the defender by taking the rook. And it's a massacre, right? So what you see here is a mix of trying to bring in more pieces and also opening new lines, right? By trading the 2 pawns like this, you've opened new space from which to attack white. So in this position, white has absolutely no move that stops d3. It's such a good move. If he moves his king off of the file, he's still on the diagonal, right? So you still play d3 attacking the knight, and when he takes, you take with the knight, and you're threatening knight takes f2. There's just no defense here. The rook can move, and then the knight could come to b2 attacking the queen, or f4 attacking e2, and white's going to lose the piece on e2 eventually that's been so focused on by black. Okay? But it's really, really important that you have some kind of focus in your attacks and not just attack randomly all over the place. So, the game just ended with white playing b4 and black playing his knight to a4. You could also calculate d3 with a strong attack, but knight a4 is so good because you're also happy to bring your knight to c3, right? And white just resigned because he can't stop knight c3, and the knight on e2 will die. So that is how to manage an attack on an open e-file with the most straightforward of methods, just bringing every piece to bear on whatever is blocking that file, right? And the technique of opening up new lines when necessary, and the technique of doing some calculating. We will also have a more complex example, so you can check for that under Classic Games. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.